So I want to introduce you to something right now called the Best Practices Checklist. Best Practices Checklist. This is something that got distributed to you in the email I sent this week. So this is basically the checklist you're going to need for doing your homework. It's also the checklist you're going to need for whenever you do the projects in Procore. Just going to point out a couple of things. The blue bars represent milestones. So these are things that are happening in the real world, usually things that when we're interacting with the client. So, and then also each milestone would trigger some subsequent tasks. So whenever working drawings are requested, these things need to happen. And if you look at these middle four columns, you'll see who is responsible for making sure each of these best practices happens. Who does what? Who does what? This is the what, this is the who, and this is the how. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to go over it more in the training, so just hang in there, and it'll start to make good sense as we go. So let's jump in, and let's start to see what this all looks like. You're going to notice it's going to be good to have that best practices checklist handy, so go ahead and find that if you haven't already done so. I'm also going to point out a couple of tricks as we're going through this training, just a couple of little helpful tricks, so please take note of those also. First of all, a lot of people actually have a problem getting into Procore. There's actually this forget your email or password thing right here. You can direct that to subcontractors to that, or you could use it yourself. It's super easy. Everyone in here should have an account in Procore. If you don't have any problems, I think the protocol is to check in with Susie Valle. So if you're having trouble getting in, go to Susie. So anyways, moving right along. So here we are. We're logging into Procore. I'm going to reference the best practices checklist just a couple times. So here's the deal. So milestone. Okay. So excuse me. So let's say in an imaginary world that working drawings have been requested. Okay. Client sends you a request for working drawings. That means that these three tasks need to happen. So, and we can also see that the design project manager is responsible for doing most of those. So, first task is to create a new project. So, right when the working drawings are requested, the next step is to create a job in Procore right at the time they're requested. So let's go through, and I'm going to take away this screen, but follow along on your own personal guides. The best practice checklists you have yourself. Here we are in Procore, and we're going to create a new project. So working drawings were requested. Okay, first best practice is to select a standard project template. That's very important. Make sure you do that. Continue. Okay, next best practice is project name. So these are most of the next best practices are just required fields. A field is just any one of these little things where you enter information. So project name. For see the quick reference guide also included in the email I sent out for a guide on what our standard naming convention. A best practice is to use the standard naming convention for the project name. But so if you don't know what that is, you can see it in the quick reference guide. For the sake of this project, we're just going to call, for the sake of the training, we're just going to call each project the project number that it is. You can find that on the project roster that was distributed. Okay, next best practice is to make sure that checkbox is checked, which by default it is. So you probably don't even really have to pay attention to that. Following along on your checklist, you'll see that the project ID and number is a required field. By the way, right now I'm acting as the design project manager. So imagine me as a design project manager. You can see that I'm designated as the person who's responsible for all of these accomplishing these best practices. in Procore. But you'll see here that the project ID / number is the responsibility of the coordinator. So, so for now it's a required field, but for now it gets skipped. The next best practice is to, or the next required field, I guess, is the project description. A good thing to use for this is the short description that we typically include on the cover sheet of our working drawings. Obviously, the working drawings aren't done yet because they were just requested. So you could just put in language that's kind of similar to what you would put in that short description. So, you know, like 8 private offices. For the sake of the practice project, just go ahead and put in kind of a random description that kind of works. You know, 1 break area. Honestly, I'm not a design project manager, so I'm not sure what to put in there, but I think that's enough on that. So square feet, for the sake of this project or for the practice, the training, just put in, you know, let's just say 10,000. Job phone and fax are not required. Estimated start date. Okay, so these are more required fields, but if you look at the best practices checklist, you'll see it's the responsibility of the project manager. So it's required, but it's not going to happen now. It's going to happen later. So next, we've got the project address. So basically all these fields are required. For the sake of when you're doing your homework, just use the Foster City address. Actually, one thing that's kind of nice is if it's if it's already in Procore, it'll auto-populate. But required fields are project address, city, country, state, zip code, and time zone. Don't forget time zone. Okay, moving along. There's 3 more best practices when you're creating a job. So first is project stage. So you'll see here, this is a very important best practice. When you're creating the job, you need to put it in pre-construction. Also choose office, so Northern California, because it's the Foster City, and the project type. For this one, I'm going to put, and for the sake of your homework, just go ahead and put design GC. Also, this is project 18. I'll call this test project 18. And what I'm going to do is, no, I'll just call it project 18. Project 18. So I'm going to invite everyone in the company to this project so you can reference it. You can go into Procore and you'll have access to this project. So if when you're doing your homework, you're having trouble remembering what to put in or whatever, you can reference this project. So let's click continue. Voila, we have created a project. So we're done with that task. So now